All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a framework that literally flips how we think about the cycle of life, mortality, and the passage of time. We're going to explore a really beautiful visual narrative from our source material that relies on a captivating metaphor, the relationship between the sun and the countless tiny bubbles on the surface of the sea. By the end of this, you might just find yourself looking at the natural world, and honestly, even the whole concept of endings in a completely different, incredibly comforting light. So, let's get started. So picture the ocean for a second. Imagine looking out over the water and seeing thousands, maybe even millions, of tiny bubbles right on the surface. Each one of those little bubbles is gleaming, right? It's catching the light and reflecting the sun on its own tiny curved surface. But as we all know, bubbles are incredibly fragile. The physics of surface tension basically dictates they only exist for a fleeting second before they pop, and they're immediately replaced by new foam and new bubbles catching that exact same light. Now I want you to ask yourself, when that bubble pops and fades away, does that mean the sun itself has vanished? Or is it simply that the reflection has changed? The source material uses this exact visual to completely challenge our immediate assumptions about disappearance and existence. The sun hasn't moved an inch, it's just that the tiny mirror holding its light has shattered.
It's such a fascinating thought experiment. The scholar Bediuzzaman Said Nursi uses this specific imagery to decode the very nature of existence. He argues that this continuous cycle of shining and fading, it's not random. When you look at the sheer volume of these flashes, the bubbles sparkling, vanishing, and then new ones taking their place to become mirrors for those same imaginary little suns, it clearly shows us something really profound. It demonstrates that these brief, temporary flashes are just that, temporary mirrors. They are vessels reflecting a constant, single, and highly elevated sun. It's almost like a giant puzzle where the impermanence of the bubble actually proves the absolute permanence of the light source.
This brilliantly illustrates a poetic but honestly highly logical concept from the text, pointing with fingers of light. As those bubbles fade out and brand new ones appear in the ocean foam, they aren't just disappearing into some dark void. They are essentially communicating. The text describes them as using different languages and pointing with fingers of light. Even in their incredibly brief existence, and actually maybe precisely because of it, they're acting as indicators. Every single flash of light on a newly formed bubble is like a luminous finger pointing right back up to the sky, constantly reminding us of the existence of that one eternal sun.
Okay, moving on to our next concept, passing the baton in nature.
Taking this whole idea out of the water and onto dry land, we actually see the exact same thing happening in biology. Living beings, plants, animals, all of us, in the natural world, we're just like those sea bubbles. We shine briefly with the power and vitality of life. But then, as Nursi points out, living creatures quietly withdraw to make room for those who come next. It's a completely purposeful stepping aside. Just like the ocean bubbles making way for new foam, this biological withdrawal is itself a reflection. It points directly to the existence of an endless owner of life. The life inside the creature might be temporary, sure, but the source of that life, that is infinite. This fundamentally shifts our perspective away from our traditional, frankly fearful, idea of mortality. Usually we think of extinction, right? The idea that death has a permanent end, this absolute vanishing into nothingness. It's a heavy, final word. But the source text offers us a totally different concept, a handover. Instead of a violent, abrupt end, it is a purposeful transition. It's the passing of the light. It completely reframes the whole cycle of death and renewal. It isn't an absolute end of life, but rather a graceful exit, just so the next reflection can take the stage.
I really want this concept of the handover to be your absolute biggest takeaway from this explainer today. The original text actually uses a specific phrase for this, a devir teslim, which literally means a handing over of duties, kind of like passing the baton in a relay race. Think about how that definition completely changes the emotional weight of mortality. It means that when a living thing dies, it is not being eradicated. No, it is simply stepping aside to allow a new reflection of the exact same eternal source to take its rightful place. The light doesn't die, the mirror just changes hands.
Which brings us to our next theme, the infinite source of light.
To truly understand this metaphor, we have to look at where it's actually pointing. The source material culminates by anchoring this whole concept in a specific theological framework, pointing to this exact verse from the Quran. Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. This serves as the ultimate spiritual anchor for our entire narrative today.
When the text talks about the single, high sun that never fades while the bubbles pop below, well, this is the eternal source it's referring to. It defines the true, unfailing source of the light that every single living creature on Earth briefly but so beautifully reflects during their time here. So, bringing it all together, we can clearly see how the beautiful imagery of the sea maps absolutely perfectly onto the stark reality of biological life. Bubbles mirror the eternal sun in the sky, in the exact same way living beings reflect the endless owner of life here on Earth. And most importantly, what we so often perceive as a harsh ending is actually just a purposeful transition. It's a handover of the light.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought based on our source material. The next time you're out in nature, maybe taking a walk, and you see a fading flower, how will you choose to look at it? Will you see it as a death, a final sad end? Or can you now see it as a beautiful handover of life, quietly making room for the next reflection of light? I really hope this framework brings a comforting, meaningful new perspective to how you view the incredible, continuous cycle of the world around you.